Great. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Human-Centered Design UAE Meetup. We're talking to you from Dubai, the United Arab Emirates. The meetup was started in 2013, and we've kind of been going on and off. It used to be UX Abu Dhabi. We changed the name to UX UAE, taking on the whole country, doing meetups in Abu Dhabi and Dubai. And then last year, when I returned to the Emirates, Nada, who's on the call, has been one of the originals as well as co-organizer. And we rebranded to Human-Centered Design UAE to keep up with industry lingo and to basically have an umbrella for anything and everything. And this is our second meetup online. I've shared as well, I'll share some more new rules of engagement now that we are online. If you're into Instagram, obviously it's not a live meetup, but whatever, you take a photo of the screen or anything, then feel free. It's HCD UAE, and on Twitter it's UX UAE. A little bit about our speaker, Robert Zikry, hopefully I pronounced it right, is a lead user experience specialist at TigerSpike. And he's sitting at the intersection of design, technology, and business, specializes in product strategy, research, design delivery across teams. He spent a lot of his time working with Emirates Airlines, improving their user experience and their mobile app. And he's also more recently worked with KFC Middle East, as well as other large brands like PepsiCo, Alphatane, OSN, Unilever, and a few others. I've met with Robert a few times already. I think one thing I wanted to remember is to apologize to Robert. He's been extremely, what's the right word? Patient, I think is probably the best word. We've had him scheduled and moved him around quite a few times due to some mostly uncontrollable circumstances. Corona is the least of those things, but also a few others. And I'm really happy we came to this day, and he's going to get to present what's going to be a great presentation. Hope everyone likes it. The other thing as well, just while we're there, because of the numbers of participants, we are going to be, if you have any questions, and please add them to the chat. Nada and I will be moderating the questions. Robert will be kind of pausing for questions, so don't wait till the end. We like to have an interactive discussion, and so jump in if you've got any questions. We may answer them in the chat. We could go back to them at the end, so we can have a more kind of casual chat at the very end, but do feel free to jump in. And if you want to get in touch with Robert, Nada, or myself, LinkedIn's the best way. We're happy to answer any questions after today. We are recording the session, and we will share that after. I think that's everything. Let me know if I've forgotten something, but otherwise, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen and pass it over to you, Robert.
Thank you, Jonathan. Let me start by sharing my screen. I hope it's working.
Yes, we can see your screen.
All right, fantastic. Let me quickly maybe stop my video just so that the connection doesn't lag. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Hi, everyone. I hope everyone watching this is safe and sound, and during those difficult, uncertain times, I hope everyone is doing okay. As Jonathan mentioned, my name is Robert. I'm a UX lead specialist at TigerSpike Dubai, and thanks for Jonathan and Nada for organizing this event. I really appreciate giving me the chance to talk in this meetup, and I would like to also thank my TigerSpike team for everything that they have done. Without them, I wouldn't be here with you guys. So with that said, I would like to start by mentioning a few of my clients that I was fortunate enough to work with. Some of the biggest names in the business. Some of them are in Dubai, and some of them are recognized across the world. And within those engagements with our clients, I found out that most of the designers, we love to frown upon and blame our clients and stakeholders for not doing enough research. I find this quite interesting because we are responsible for promoting user research and promoting research activities and evangelizing the reason for doing human-centered design practices. We are responsible for promoting our own process. So why would we blame our stakeholders for not understanding why we do research? So I think this has to stop. This has to change, because at the end of the day, we are very responsible for what we do, for the part that we promote into our own process. If anyone would like to read a little bit about how to manage clients and how to manage stakeholders and control their understanding and talk to them, I can't promote enough the book by Mike Montero. It's called You're My Favorite Client. It's one of the best literature out there, although it was done like 6 or 7 years ago, I think, but it's aging very well. If you would like to work better with stakeholders and start listening to them better, managing them better, and being the right consultative, experienced designer you are. This talk is mostly around user research, but it's also based on the myth and misconceptions that people might have about user research. It's the common misconceptions that stakeholders might have, and those misconceptions are the reason why we cannot do what we do, or we cannot go in depth into our UX design process or our overall strategy. So let me start by the first myth, which is user research is optional. Some companies think that researching user needs is a bonus or a stretch target. They view user research as a nice to have activity. Well, in fact, user research is necessary for survival. From what we've seen across the board, a lot of businesses, a lot of teams, they were doomed by not doing enough research. And by user research, we can also expand it to design research in general. User research is just the part where we are seeing the behavior and reading the data and evidence on the most important thing for users. So with that said about survival, I would like to give a quick example from Google. When they launched the Google Glass project, if Google Glass was the only thing that Google has done, if Google was a startup, for example, I don't think they would have survived much. They would have been doomed. And the reason was, when they launched this product, it didn't necessarily solve a real problem or satisfy a real user need. It's basically doing some features from what we already have in our own smartphones. So they released it with few features like maps, like calendars, notifications, and a couple of other features that are quite mundane or basic. But most importantly, they have given that Google Glass product the ability to capture photos and videos without asking for anybody's consent, or without even showing to people that you are being captured, at least in their initial versions. I'm well aware that Apple now is going deeper into that glass product. I'm actually keen to see what they are about to launch. I'm not sure if it's going to be wildly successful, because the thing is, the main important thing that Google has failed to do is to capture the real psychological problem that people, or a concern that people have about privacy. people are concerned, and that's why Google Glass was banned from almost every public place, like cinemas, restaurants, hospitals, even banks. And that's why they couldn't survive. If they have listened to their users, they would have distinguished that early on. The other thing about user research, why it's not optional, is that user needs are constantly changing. We see things happening over and over and happening very rapidly. So a case in point is, for example, WhatsApp. A few years ago, WhatsApp introduced this feature about sending voice notes, voice memo. We didn't really know that we needed it. WhatsApp was widely successful. The idea about sending voice notes as a replacement for the old and original answering machine or voicemail in mobile phones was already there. So the need already existed, but we didn't know that we needed it. Once they introduced it, they found out that it was very successful. However, people's needs are also changing because they started to send voice notes in larger or longer formats. So people would stick the record button for a minute or two, and that's why they introduced the next release slide to log feature, and hence they kept updating the feature. They could have said, yeah, we have a great app, it's widely used, but and we don't need to do it or to do any updates, but they didn't. They kept changing the product to match the constant need for their users. And that's why the main thing from this part is user research is not optional. Every company and every team and every product survival depend on it. Customers' needs are constantly changing, and we have to keep up with that change. I'm not sure if I'm going too fast or if there was any questions in the chat. Please stop me, Jonathan, if there is anything that came up.
No, the speed's great. No questions. Oh, we do have a question. Sorry. How do we come to know about the user's need? Like as a designer, how to be updated about change in users' need?
Well, first start by being in touch with the users. So some companies will always have part of every sprint or every couple of sprints to do user interviews or usability studies. They also should be keeping a tab on what works and what doesn't from analytics point of view. So if they have released a feature and suddenly this feature is taking over the whole product, then there is something there. Or if they have released a feature and no one is using it, or people on Twitter or on social media are frowning upon it or talking badly about that feature, then the first thing is to keep in touch with them and then be agile enough and nimble enough and confident enough to say, well, this feature didn't really work well. We are about to make it better. Or to be curious enough to dig deeper, which is something that I will address later in the slides, to dig deeper into what's not going well in that product and even invite those angry customers or people from the community to tell you more why they are not happy, if that's the case. So we will always see people behavior changes. However, the only thing that doesn't change really is human psychology. So if we base many of our decisions and our own discoverables around what people really need in their human lives, because their human lives is outside our products, but sometimes we assume it's not. So if we base things on psychology, usually things are much safer. And if we keep tab on the assumptions that we do around humans and around change in their behaviors, and we keep being vigilant about validating those assumptions, things will be much safer for us in terms of survival and agility for change. Does that make sense?
Yeah, great. Cool.
Right, cool. Are we good to jump to the next part?
Yeah, keep going.
All right. So one of the most prominent myths in our industry is data is king. I'm not saying it's not. Well, data, in fact, is very important. It's very substantial to what we do. being in touch with the users and being in touch with everything that they do in our products and in our services is very important to give us that validation. However, it's not the only validation activity. It's not the only research mechanism that we have in our toolbox. It shouldn't, because strategies and operations based on data, sometimes they would fail. And in order to give some evidence around this, there is a short story. I think many of you might have already heard it before. It was around during World War II when the US Navy wanted to decrease the amount of bombers and fighter jets, or not jets, fighter planes, because jets was not invented back then, that were being lost to enemy fire. The problem, the dilemma that they had was that they needed to add armor or protection to the plane. However, if they added to the whole plane, the plane would be much slower and heavier. Hence, more fighter planes would be lost. So the researchers analyzed the planes that are returning from combat operations in Europe. They needed to base the decision on where to put the armor on where do planes get shot most frequently. So they analyzed the data and they found out that the fuselage and the rest of the plane is the most places that get shot every time. And that's why if they armored those two places in the plane, planes would be safer, hence they would lose less planes. Enter a brilliant mathematician called Abraham Wald. He said with absolute confidence and conviction that the extra armor belongs not on the parts that could survive a lot of bullets, but to the parts that couldn't. And the reason is the planes that they were analyzing were the planes that returned back from combat, which means that those diagrams in that hole, those bullet holes in that diagram actually showed that the areas that could stand the damage rather than the areas that couldn't. So according to him, the armor should go to the engine rather than the plane. This very snippet shows us that data sometimes isn't enough to tell the full story. It's in fact can be misleading or inconclusive. If we only base our decisions on data, sometimes there was this rise in the term data-driven decision-making, which was all right, but if we base everything on data, we are losing the human factor of it. If I want to also tell a small snippet about it. A couple of days ago, the New York Times, in their main page, they put the names of the people lost to COVID just to humanize the data, because in the United States they are across 100,000 mark, and it's a tragedy. It's very sad. But the way to humanize it is to tell stories that so-and-so was a fighter veteran, or so-and-so was an accountant. Just getting in touch with the human part of the data is making things better. It's making people use less of the analytical part of the brain, but rather the human empathetic part of the brain. And empathy is everything. In terms of the UX and the design industry, number one skill is empathy. So we shouldn't only rely on the hardcore data alone. Before moving to the next myth, I would like to check if there is anything that is being mentioned. Any questions?
At the moment, there's no questions. Refreshing to hear. Data isn't king at the end. Data alone isn't enough to tell the story. Yeah, I think we all, just an observation, I totally agree with you. We all have that same battle where people try to use data to, with their agenda, bring forward and feel like that's a complete story. Like we had a meeting today where we spoke about that, and people saying, if you say research, they say, yes, I've done my research. Here's the data, here's the analytics, here's the whatever, the telemetry, without necessarily having a holistic picture. So yeah, just a lot of people agreeing with you. But.
Yep. And also metrics are very important, like I mentioned, about telling that things are going into the right direction or the wrong direction, whichever, but it's not enough to tell why things are the way they are or if there is anything else that's missing in the story. Only when we get with the human part of the business, we will learn more. Um, which brings me to the next part. It's very closely related. Um, the next misconception is usually researchers are only in touch with loyal and returning users. That if we are about to do a usability study or we want to do some user interviews, we will only talk to people that are returning to our product or are using our service and happy with that usage. There is nothing wrong with that. However, similar to what happened with the US Navy in World War II, they didn't research everyone. They only gathered data from the survivors, which in this case are the loyal users that keep coming to our products and use our services. If we only utilize the data from those survivors or those loyal users, we are susceptible to something called survivorship bias. Um, it's a trap that many of us fall into. Sometimes some companies might open up to larger area for prospect or target users if they want to target more personas or a couple of other archetypes for the product usage. But that's also not enough. Potential users are not everything else, or are not everyone else that can be using the product. Um, some examples from many companies across the whole industry, everyone is having this unsubscribe form that we are all familiar with. Some of them look nice, some of them are written nice in terms of UX writing. Some of them looks ugly and very not on brand, like the Apple one and the Amazon one. They just don't want you to go, but at least they are trying to know why you are going. They are just doing the bare minimum. Even the MailChimp one, the one that most companies use, they having those metrics to see what's not working well in their newsletters or in their products. At least that's good if they want to get more data around why people are abandoning the product or the service. But the best thing that I've seen in a while was the best research that people do is just get in touch with your angry users. Jason Fried, the CEO of Basecamp, he just responded to one of the angry tweets by saying that I would love to hear more from you. Can we talk sometime? Same thing Elon Musk has done. Brian Chesky from Airbnb has done a few times. It's just refreshing to see that companies and teams are caring to hear from people abandoning the product and people that are not happy with the product, equally to people that are loyal and keep coming to the product. Bill Gates summed it up brilliantly when he said that your most unhappy customers are your greatest source of learning. And it bears truth to our design process. We should include everyone in our research. However, sometimes we should always prioritize which kind of comments we should put in the roadmap. For example, if we cared only about satisfying people that are abandoning the product, it might be the right metric now, but it might not be the right metric for the longer term strategy. Sometimes people will say, yes, it's fine to keep people unhappy, those 10% or those 5% churn, we are happy with it because it's still serving the bigger strategy. But at least we should be doing it intentionally and with a strategy and roadmap in place rather than haphazardly or by just being in touch with random users that keep coming to the product. Stop me if there is anything, Jonathan.
Yeah, keep going. Just some comments, but no questions. So if you've just joined, if you have any questions, then please add them to the chat, and Robert's going to be answering them as we go along.
Yep. Happy to. At any slide, not only between the myths, at any point, yeah, let me know. The next one is one of my favorite and the most debatable myths, which is basically around designers are capable of coming up with great designs without the need for doing user research. I know that many people might understand this misconception differently, but I would like to expand from an industry that's closer to us. It's a physical industrial design industry, which is car design. Of course, they produce cars first as concepts, and they go to those shows every year where they brilliantly display a one-off car concept that resembles nothing close to reality. It's great. It gets people wow, but it doesn't really serve anybody's needs. It just gets PR and gets marketing and clicks and thumbs up. Sometimes in our design sphere, in our industry, we fall into the same trap of producing beautifully shot, beautifully designed dribble shots and futuristic designs and visual directions that sometimes are not even realistic or feasible to be developed. They look stunning, and I love taking a look at them every day. But at at some point, people should start and ask themselves, why am I producing this concept? Is it to show my design skills, my sketch or Figma or animation skills, or is it to solve a real problem or a real thing that I've heard from users or witnessed during usability studies? Those medium and dribble and behance shots are fine. They are okay in terms of visual designs. However, sometimes they are misleading because basically people are trying to design the things right. They are using all the beautiful high quality assets. They are doing all the animation tips and tricks in the book, but it's very important to first ask, are we designing the right thing? Is the team working on the right problem in the first place? And then only then we start by putting the design solutions in place and try to prioritize one solution over the next. Because sometimes when we go all the way into one of the design solutions and make it beautiful, sometimes we are missing the another routes of possibly alternative solutions that might work good as well. And the last and most important thing about it is we should be able to measure the impact of that specific solution, of that specific design. We should ask ourselves, is that the right thing? And is it measuring well? Is it delivering the value we want to give to our users? This is basically the endless loop that we are in our industry. We first define, are we designing the right things? And then we design the things right. And then we measure how things are. This is the core of the lean UX movement, as we all know. And there is nothing wrong, like I said, in those dribble shots and those Instagrammable design concepts. But in my opinion, the end game of any design is to be launched to actual users. We should be able to learn and measure the success of those designs and iterate with confidence according to what works and what doesn't. One of my favorite design heroes is Victor Papanek. He said this quote back in the 70s about industrial design, and it still applies now. He said the only important thing about design is how it relates to people. If our design doesn't fit the real world, then we can call it art. And it is art because, as you all know, those dribble shots really look artsy and they look really fantastic. But if they are not launched or released, they are as good as pieces of art being hung in museums. They don't solve real need for people. Designs are for products that solve problems. Art is more for expression and putting things so that people admire it. I know that it's debatable, and I'm happy to debate it now if anyone wants to to open up the question, but it's one of the most important things that I have seen across many teams that I worked with. And that's why clients sometimes they say, well, we can see this design shot, or we can see this concept working, let's release it. Let's not test it. Let's not do any user research before or after it. We are happy with that beautiful dribble shot. Make us one that looks like it. And that's a trap. That's a very big misconception. The next part, if there isn't any questions.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions. One, I was going to ask for clarification. Maybe you can, not quite sure, but I'll ask it anyway. How effective are use case research on Medium articles? Often they are biased to their requirements. Can we use them to our liking, and will that help us? Not quite sure. Does that make sense to you?
I'm not sure.
Maybe Faizan, maybe you can reframe or change that question, or if anybody like in the chat, we can ask it later. The other one was, are there any best practices on research methods for each phase within product development, discovery, exploration?
Let me get to this one.
So,
okay, so
does that make sense? So within each phase of product development, exploration, discovery, etc., is there best practice on research methods or sensible defaults, I guess?
There is, and there is a lot of literature that was written and a lot of talks that talk about this, how to prioritize research methods, or how to choose even research methods according to the phase you are in. I'm going to talk about it in a few slides time, but the bigger picture here is that the more you go deeper into the solution, the more tactical your research is. So before even defining a solution, you should research the problem. And in order to do that, there is a wide variety of research methods that you can have, from user interviews, contextual inquiries, diary studies. There is a lot of things you can do that doesn't even necessarily have a product in mind. But once you start designing an actual solution, a digital solution, then things will start to go narrower. You will need to go more tactical. You need to see heat maps. You need to see, if you launch it, you need to see the analytics. Or if you haven't launched it yet, you can do usability testing on few variations, whether those variations are hi-fi or low fidelity designs, it doesn't matter. It depends on your stage in the life cycle. And of course, after you release, the measuring part can always be qualitative or quantitative, depending on your product setup. So if you have all the heat maps in place and A/B testing and analytics in place, definitely use it to make sure that you are on the right path. I will touch upon this same thing later on. So if you just give me,
yeah, I've got a couple more questions, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, please.
I think people are getting warmed up, which is great.
Great. That's good.
I'm just going to expand this. Sorry, 1 second.
Let me stop it here.
What if the company that you work for, this is, I think, something, especially in the Corona times, a lot of us as designers have experienced. What if the company that you work for wants to push things to the market as soon as possible? It doesn't really care about the customer wants, because they think that showing new features or launching is more tangible than doing research. Is that, I mean, if it's something you cover later on, then feel free to say
it is.
You know, yep. It is? Okay, okay. So maybe let's go on to the next one, because yeah, like it's a great question. Have you ever come across in your work where a design was selected that failed to convert in real life as a product?
What do you mean by was selected? Is it selected by the team or the client? Or...
I guess they mean like something went to market, you know, so like you went through the design process, and correct me in the chat if I'm wrong, but it then failed to convert in real life. So, like,
Well,
have
that's
you
a
ever experienced that? Is what they're asking.
well, every design we launch is a hypothesis. We assume that this piece of design will increase conversion. If it doesn't, we should be in place to, we should have the agility and the mindset to change things fast. I have been part of a lot of redesign activities for a lot of clients, mostly Emirates Airlines. I have redesigned my own designs just because things were not working well. And that's okay, because like I said, everything that we do is, we have a hypothesis that this piece of design will satisfy the people's needs, or will increase conversion, or will bring the ROI that we are aiming for. And if it doesn't, then let's change it. If it does, then let's keep it, or maybe improve it. So rather than it bringing 10%, let's look at avenues to make it 20%. And that's why we should research before launching, so that, or test before launching, so that we are sure that this hypothesis will stand and will hold its water. And then when we release, we should have the measuring mechanism to know that it's actually producing the value it's bringing. I'm not sure if I answered that question.
No,
because,
definitely.
yeah.
It's what I had in mind as well, right? It's always about mitigating risk and trying to minimize the risk, but there's never a perfect solution or a failure, right? Like, it's an iteration. Nothing's ever in a complete state.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah,
totally. Another one, sorry, and then I'll keep going. One is maybe slightly off topic. I'm going to get Nada or even Greta. She seems to be doing a great job supporting us in answering, so thank you to answer. But another question was, I'm a startup entrepreneur and working on my product. What are cost-effective yet impactful ways I could roll out user research? It's a great question, very relevant, I think. What's the minimum viable bit of research one should partake?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there is a book by Erica Hall called Just Enough Research. It's how to minimize the time and the effort and not go into the law of diminishing returns of research. The first thing is to validate the idea as it is, without even jumping into producing this idea. So if you have a 30-second elevator pitch, just a couple of sentences that describe your startup idea, and you are producing the pitch, or making sure that this pitch is making sense to people, asking people for their opinion. Would you think this would fit your normal life? A lot of people would say yes. So that's why you shouldn't stop there. Or maybe they will say no, it doesn't. Also, you shouldn't stop there, and you should keep asking questions on why it would fit or why it wouldn't fit your normal life, how you're doing it differently. There is a theory called jobs to be done by Clay Christensen. I would suggest you read it as well. It's basically what people are hiring to produce the job you are trying to do. So let's let's take an example of Property Finder as a tool, or as a business. If it wasn't as established as it is right now, what other tools are people using to find properties? Are they talking to existing brokers? Do they have the word of mouth? Are they using other competition in the market? If yes, okay, let's try to see what's not working well in those competitions or in the existing solutions. Like, brokers sometimes are unavailable. They produce different price brackets for the same property. You would have a phone number, and you get routed to something else, so it's not authentic, and so on. I would say, if you are in the early stage, always do user interviews, and if it's a product that solves real life need, or it solves a real life solution, try to do some contextual inquiry and see how people are going about solving that problem with other products or with other services that are in place. Only then you will see your competitive edge before even producing your product. Once you have a product in place, this is the normal day-to-day UX execution work of usability testing, iterating in the various parts of the product, and then later on you should measure and see how things are performing after you go live. I hope this gives you a bit of an answer. There is a more depth to this question. It's a very, very good question, but I don't think there is enough time to answer it because it goes on case-by-case basis.
Totally. Yeah, no, great answer. Please, yeah, keep going.
All right. So the next one is the widely held user research myth, which is the misconception that usability testing is user research, but the thing is, it's not. They mean different things. Actually, usability testing is a subset of user research, but research in general is more, is much bigger to that. There are generally two types or two groups of research activities that we usually do. There is quantitative and qualitative research. The quantitative is focusing on data and hard evidence that surrounds a specific feature, a specific problem, or a specific behavior. We usually use those research activities to answer questions like how many or how much or what would happen if this happened with numerical evidence or statistical returns. The other group is the qualitative part, which goes beyond usability testing, of course. It goes beyond data as well. It's more about gathering user insights and observations and real needs. They usually answer the what's and the why's. Sometimes it touches upon the how's. However, in normal process, we see them complementing each other and informing each other. And in our product delivery life cycle, when those research types, when they meet each other, real aha moments happen, real insights happen. It's a blessing to see something happening from data. There is evidence coming in, and you have heard it from actual users, or you are seeing it coming in the app reviews, for example, or on Twitter and social media. People are talking about the same thing that data is validating. And if you dig a little bit deeper into the qualitative part and you listen to people and see why things are working or why it doesn't, that's when real insights happen. So this slide will touch upon something that I answered with one of the questions, which about what are the most common research activities that we usually do. This is some of the most common, but it's not all, of course. We have Google Analytics, which is quantitative research, heat map analysis, which is quantitative, but sometimes it can be qualitative if we dug deeper into some of the areas. There is A/B testing, there is user surveys, there is information architecture testing like card sorting or tree test or click testing as well. There is the good old usability testing, of course, and user interviews and contextual inquiries. I didn't mention diary studies because it doesn't go into the common activities, but it's a very important research activity as well. But I haven't seen it being used a lot in the majority of the work that I was involved in. However, it's a very important thing. With that said, usability testing is just a subset of user research. Research is much broader than just testing the usability of a specific product, whether for an existing or potential users, that's something else. But I would like for the non-researchers or non-UX people in the call to know that things are much broader than this, and usually we can use any one of those toolboxes depending on the type of question or the type of problem we are facing in that specific moment in time.
I've actually got a question for you.
Sure.
It's not in the chat. It's my own question. Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that one. Why do you think that is? And
Sorry.
I guess so. Why do you think that is about? You know, usability, people perceiving usability as user research?
Actually, that's a very good question, John. I think because the majority of the books and the majority of the articles and the majority of the discussions that we have is around usability. So how people are perceiving this icon, how clear this text or this title is, if people press this button, what will happen? And the majority of the questions are tactical. And also in the early days of the web and digital products, when we have usability heuristics from Jacob Nielsen, the 10 heuristics, it's only about usability, or it's caring about usability. We see people talk about that part and they go and they jump into that part of the product. But the user experience is much broader than the experience of that specific product. So people use the product at a moment in time. Sometimes the most important thing to fix is way beyond this product or the usability or how easy that product is. And you can see it yourself. Amazon is not the most beautifully designed website. Actually, Craigslist is one of the most used website, and it's as ugly as it was 20 years ago, but it's producing value. And the usability, in terms of usability, it works all right. But what happens beyond that product is what's more important sometimes. And I think that's why some product managers or stakeholders think that UX people are only caring about how usability is, or sometimes we degrade ourselves when we talk about our work in the form of usability, or when we think that the only thing we produce is wireframes and flows. UX, or user experience as a whole, is much broader than this. Sometimes we are the ones responsible of that misconception when we don't talk about the other touch points of that product.
So you think it's to do with the maturity of human-centered design as a practice, as a craft? Partly.
In terms of the industry maturity, we are getting there, of course, but it also differs between the maturity of every team you talk to.
Cool.
Yeah.
So sorry, before you go on, one more question. We've had one answer to it, but if you don't mind, just a quick.
Sure.
We've had a couple of answers to it, but yeah, just maybe your take on it was around diary studies and what are the use cases? Like, when are they useful? Under what circumstances?
Usually diary studies are best when you want to see the hour by hour, or sometimes minute by minute update, or daily updates of that person's life. So if you want to track what that person or what that user group have done over a specific amount of time, let's say a week or a few weeks time, and where do they face problems, or what are they doing on hourly basis, and they log that. And when you gather enough insights about this logging, and you can see the patterns, you can see a specific problem that the majority of people are having. For example, if you are, let's say, if you are producing a product that helps people do better grocery shopping, you want to see how they are managing their grocery shopping, how they are going about to see the best place to buy this grocery from, if they want to go into, let's say, the fish market or this authentic meat place, or if they are vegans, what are they consuming. Maybe it's not the best example, but if you want to track behavior over time, that's where diary studies is best for. It's very qualitative, and I think it's very, I've seen it happening. It's very time consuming also to keep tab on every one of those updates every day from 10 or 20 people. It's not that easy, but when you go through it, it's very, very rewarding for the design or the research team to see what people are going about in their normal daily lives outside the product that you are designing or producing.
Yeah, great. We've had also some great answers in the chat, but yeah, please keep going.
Sure. The next one is something that I think might have touched upon, which is usability testing. I'm not talking about user research in general. Now we are digging slightly deeper into usability testing itself. A lot of people think that it's very expensive. It requires a lot of equipment and complex process. When reality is the complete opposite. During the pre-COVID times, we only used testing room. We needed a testing room. We needed an observation room where you invite the rest of the team, the stakeholders, everyone you want them to see the products being tested in real life. And you also have some tools that will allow you for remote observation. Right now, this in-person usability testing is not something that being done because of COVID, but there is a rise, of course, and prominence of remote usability testing, moderated as well, but it's remote. So all you need is just a few software tools, something that would give you ability to share your screen and to talk in real life, and just send a link for the prototype or those screenshots of the product you're trying to test, and some devices, and you're good to go. Whether you do it in-house or off-site, it's completely doable with the minimum amount of everyday products that's laying around. We don't have, in this day and age, we don't have an excuse not to do usability testing, which is the most tactical and the most, I think, one of the most prominent user research activities that every product should have every sprint or every couple of sprints. Having to see clients thinking that usability testing is very expensive and time consuming, that was a thing of the past. Right now it's very nimble and agile, and things couldn't get any easier or faster. Usually the only thing that will make usability testing slower is actually have nothing to do with equipments. It's the human factor of it, how to recruit the right users, how to get in touch with them, and how to screen them properly, and scheduling all the testing sessions, whether you do a couple of them every day or whether you squeeze 5 or 6 at a time, whether you do it in parallel or in series, according to how many researchers are there on the product, it differs. But in terms of equipment and in terms of the actual devices and tools that you have to use, it's never been as easy as it is right now. All right.
Yeah,
so
great. Keep going. No questions.
The next one is also a debatable one. So sometimes we as teams, we would hear a stakeholder saying, well, our marketing team did a focus group and people actually want this feature, or people love this service that we're doing. It's okay, that's fine. Focus groups, let me start by defining what focus groups for maybe people who wouldn't be familiar with it. It's usually made up from 6 to 9 people with a moderator who manages and facilitates the group discussion. It's putting all those people in a single meeting room and facilitate what's going on in that group discussion for an hour or 45 minutes in time. Usually, in general, talking to customers is much better than not talking with customers at all. That's for sure. So definitely 1 is better than 0. However, focus groups introduces many issues. The way it is, the format of it, there are many debatable issues that happen that can compromise the quality of the research outputs. I highly recommend reading this article by Nikki Anderson called, I'll say it, Focus Groups Suck. It's a very, very good article. And I've took a few of its snippets from it, because it's usually what happens across teams. You can see it over and over. Focus groups produce something called groupthink. When you have a group of 6 or 7 people in place, they would usually start to agree with each other. You will find people opinions having harmony to it, and sometimes that harmony is very detrimental, or there shouldn't be that harmony in place, because you still need to know why things are the way they are. If everybody is agreeing with everybody, some things might go unnoticed. This usually happens because of a psychological effect called desirability bias. People like to be desirable by strangers, and because you are putting nice strangers in a single room, they wouldn't want to disagree with each other because they still want to be likable. And that group thing affects the result of that research, because it overthrows the individual thoughts and individual needs. The other problem is solution-focused focus groups. So sometimes you will find the group jump on a single solution or multiple solutions, and they will start talking about that specific solution and the viability for it and the feasibility for it. And if they heard second or third hand stories about that specific solution that it worked in a different context, sometimes that's not what we need. What we need from research, most importantly, is problems. What are the problems that we are trying to solve? And let us decide on the best solution to execute on, rather than jumping straight into solution too early. And that also poses its risk. The next thing is, if you had a focus group, or if, well, we see it every day, and not in focus groups, in every meeting. Sometimes you will see a few opinionated people strongly arguing about their own opinions or their own opposite points, and they will talk about it without giving a chance to the other participants to speak. And the whole group will start talking about whether it's awesome or good or whether it's not, and you'll find that debate going back and forth between those two opinions, and it's a conflict. It's fine to have a conflict, and you should resolve it, and you should manage it as a facilitator. But sometimes what we need is not to focus on the conflict. We want to know why this problem is more important than that other problem or that other need, and we want to dig deeper, which can only happen sometimes on one-to-one basis. Last but not least is the phenomenon called focus group of one. When you find someone who is over confident or tends to speak over other people's thoughts or opinions, and they would steer that conversations into their own feelings and their own opinions. This phenomenon can easily negate the views of less articulate or more introverted or reserved people in the room. Those people are having equally valid points and equally valid opinions, but because of the nature of the setup itself, it's making it less open for them to speak up, and hence it's less conclusive for us as researchers, because, well, it's a lost opportunity. Those people were in the room for 45 minutes and they haven't had a chance to talk because of this dominant personality in the group. Mike Montero summarizes it very well when saying the only thing anyone's ever learned from a focus group is who's the loudest person in the room. I'm not saying focus groups are not effective. I'm just saying that the majority of the cases of doing focus groups as a research technique is not as effective as having one-to-one interviews. At the end of the day, you have invited those 7 or 10 participants to come to your offices or to talk with you online for an hour. So if you want to make the most out of it, talk with them as one-to-one basis, because in the end of the day, our digital products are quite personal. They are going to use that specific product as a person on their own. They're not going to use it in a group, unless it's a product that will only work in a group format. Only then you can maybe have a focus group with that specific archetype or a specific target persona.
I'll just Just pause there. It's a great topic. I've also there's a few questions in the group, but I just wanted to kick off maybe with some of my own. 100% agree with you. And I don't like the word. It's kind of like a bad word in the design community. But one thing, like, I don't know how much of that happens here in Dubai. I haven't worked agency side, but in Australia, for example, both agency and non-agency, I think there's space and room for co-design, for design sprints, for things that are not focus groups, and it's up to the facilitator to make sure that you don't have a focus group like scenario. So I think it really depends on what you're trying to capture and how much time you have, etc. But there's huge value, in my opinion, from some of those other practices like co-design or design workshop, where we look at a journey map or a service design blueprint by maybe a group of people, where you don't have one expert and they're all, as best you can as a facilitator, contributing equally. What are your thoughts on that? Have you done some of those things, or have you, because yeah.
Well, absolutely, I agree with you. In terms of co-design and inviting users or inviting participants to come over and sketch some of the ideas that they have, and we frame the whole session as this is co-creation. We are here to come up with few solutions that might or might not work. We want to see what works and what doesn't, without making it too focused on solutions. Sometimes we want to hear from them about the problems and see what works from their point of view. Yes, absolutely, that can work. And inviting users into our own design sprints, that's absolutely crucial for the work that we do. However, sometimes if it's loosely moderated workshop or co-creation session, things might go south pretty easily. If you have a big group of people who don't know each other and want maybe to have that competition of, I came up with the best idea, I want to convince everybody else about it. So it's a fine line, but definitely when it's well organized and well prepared for, it's a blessing to have users in parts of our delivery sprints or our delivery lifecycle in general.
Great. Another question. Can you give an example from your own experience on a focus project that you've tried a focus group? Maybe as an extension, like why did it not go to plan or go to plan?
Okay, to be honest with you, in my previous company, before I joined Tiger Spike 5 years ago, I was working in an advertising agency. I'm not sure if you are familiar with it. It's called DDB. I was in the digital arm by Tribal. They're called Tribal DDB. They work with the likes of Unilever, P&G, and other big FMCG products manufacturers. And the marketing team usually will be the one doing the focus group. I would observe, I would just see what they come up with. And usually for me, in terms of digital part of the work, I wouldn't find it insightful at all, because people would talk more about that actual product of cleaning product or tea, or they would think, the marketing team would try to grab from them an advertising slogan or an angle for their next advertising campaign, rather than why this product actually fits their needs. Sometimes they would strike a chord. Sometimes they would ask a good question. But from what I observed, it wasn't that great. In the times during Tiger Spike, I haven't been in any focus groups. I wasn't pushing for it, and I haven't seen a situation where a focus group will trump an one-to-one user interviews situation. Some of our teams have done focus groups and they were successful in their part, but I can't speak on their behalf because I wasn't part of it.
Cool. Yeah, I might just skip some of the questions and ask them at the end. So apologies if your question hasn't been covered. Yeah, keep going.
Sure. All right. The next one we have touched upon a few minutes back, which is about A/B testing. Sometimes our product manager or the stakeholder will say, well, let's launch it. We will do A/B testing later. There is no time for doing user interviews or doing usability testing or anything else. Let's just launch. And it's like a captain of a ship saying, well, let's just release the ship with those many holes in it, and we are happy with it. And when the inevitable happens and the ship sinks or the feature doesn't really work as intended, we see that some product managers will spin it and say, well, at least we have learned what works and what doesn't, which is true, but we could have mitigated that risk well in advance. And also A/B testing will tell us that this feature have failed or this variation has failed, but it wouldn't tell us why it's not working well or why it has failed. The reality of things is, once the product is live, it's too late to make any major changes in the product itself or its strategy. It's not as easy as doing things well in advance. And A/B testing is not the only savior that we have in our hands. Basically, what we are doing and seeing sometimes is positive things happening in a product. An A/B test, an A/B variation that's working well, and maybe it's something that outside the product that made it work well, like a factor of marketing has done something differently, or there is an issue with the competition, or undefined psychological needs that made this A/B test variation work, but it's outside our control sometimes. In other words, correlation doesn't imply causation. Just because something is happening or something is succeeding or something is failing, sometimes it's not us who have done it. And case in point is Zoom, for example. Just because they have a good product doesn't mean that they are succeeding. Only when COVID happened, Zoom have exponentially succeeded, because it wasn't about usability in general. Whatever A/B tests that have been done on that product, it wouldn't have made it a huge success. Sometimes things outside the scope of the product make it successful. I would like to play a very short snippet from a talk by Stuart Frisbee, the former director at Booking.com. As many of you are aware, Booking.com, they do hundreds and maybe thousands of A/B tests every day. They are vigilant and very ruthless about the A/B test culture that they have. And this is something that he had to say a couple of years about that subject.
And perhaps the biggest frustration is you don't know why it failed. And that's really the biggest frustration I think I experience as someone who's done thousands of A/B tests is, I don't know whether it was a bad idea. I don't know if it was a bad implementation. I don't know if it was a combination of those things. In most cases, it's probably my poor design skills. But you don't know, you just don't know. And that's a real frustration, and something that I think people often look at A/B testing as a panacea for understanding users, and it really isn't a panacea. It's better than not knowing anything, but it certainly isn't even close to knowing everything. So for that reason, you have to keep spending money on research. You shouldn't take your research budget and throw it all into building a new A/B testing framework, because you need the two things. So at Booking.com, user research in the traditional sense is maybe applied a bit differently to it is in a traditional company. User research for us becomes an input into hypothesis generation rather than the output of a product development process. So you take a hypothesis, or you take a group of hypotheses into a user testing session, and you build data and you build opinions around why this hypothesis holds weight or doesn't hold weight. You give that back to the product development team, and they build off that hypothesis, which then gets tested in an experiment.
Okay, so with that said, A/B testing may tell us what works, but it won't tell us why it's working or how it could work better. And that's why we should be using multiple other user research activities to give us that evidence and that full picture for the product. The next thing, if we don't have any questions, John.
Yeah, keep going.
Yep. Is something that we have heard multiple times in many meetings, in many stakeholder interviews. Some CEOs, some middle management, some product managers will say, well, I'm the user, I'm telling you this will work or this wouldn't work. Unfortunately, the people who have the most influence over the user experience often have the least amount of contact with users. There was a study saying that 80% of companies feel like they delivered a great experience to their customers. However, in reality, only 8% of their customers agree. And that's a huge gap. That's that's tenfold difference. It tells us that teams think that, well, we have created this awesome product. We know that the users will love it. We like the way it works. We like the way it looks. However, in reality, our users might see something completely different from what we see. We are not the users, they are. And it's almost arrogant to think that we are the users, even if we are using that specific product in our normal lives, but we can't speak on behalf of the rest of our user base. This is based on a psychological effect by two scientists called Dunning and Kruger. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, and which is basically mapping the confidence and the knowledge. The less knowledgeable people are about a specific subject, if they have seen just enough, they might think they know everything about it. So a lot of people will be very confident, and they wouldn't be even have any self-reflection that they might not know everything, or they might have missed a few bits and pieces, the more novice they are. However, once they start seeing more usability studies, or they talk more to users, or they see heat maps and where people are clicking against what they have assumed or hypothesized, they will say, okay, now there is more to it. I'm not sure that I know everything. And the more they see, the more knowledge they gain, the more they know that there is more to it. And at some point, there is this curve of despair when they know that they don't know enough. And that's beautiful. That's actually the right mindset, that we are always curious because we will never be able to grasp it all. But when we go deeper into that specific problem, when we see patterns more emerging more, and people are doing more of that specific behavior, we might start feeling more confident again, until the point where we have seen everything, we have learned everything, we have spent enough time on that specific problem or that specific feature or that specific part of the research, and we know that we don't know enough, but we know that at least we covered all the basics. And this is when the confidence goes back up. So sometimes ignorance more frequently begets confidence than knowledge. Usually the answer to this specific problem about I am the user, because I've seen it happening many times with me and with our teams, is to involve those very opinionated people into our user research studies, make them observe silently from another room, or show them recordings of your usability studies or your user interviews. Show them that people are not happy with that specific feature that they have thought is a winner, or show them that people are more interested in that specific thing rather than the other thing that they are strongly opinionated about. And that will get them to lower their confidence and be more empathetic to the users and listen more to you as a designer and researcher. Do we have any questions here?
No, we're good.
Okay, great. The last one is user research happens only during discoveries. I'm going here to touch upon a few bits and pieces that we discussed across the other myths, most of which is, when do we use which research methods? Research in general is an art as much as a science. Using which tool is, or which activity is very important. Some research activities are more exploratory. You see the big picture. You have no idea what are the problems. You sometimes not even knowing the market fit for that product or that service. you need to explore. And this goes back to the question about being a startup. In early phase, I'm seeing what are the leanest and the quickest way of doing research. This is it. Doing more of the exploratory research. And then once you know enough about the big picture, once you know the defined market, the defined problems that you are after, this is when you do some strategic research. This is when you have no idea about the solution, but at least you have discovered unmet needs and defined problems. And then you start moving into the tactical research. This is the third part of, we have multiple solutions. The solution might affect that problem. We explore and validate those solutions with users, and then we release. And once we release those solutions, or one of those winning solutions, we do operational kind of research where we evaluate and optimize the chosen one. It's this levels of research is a great way of looking at problems differently. Where are we in that problem space? Are we in the problem space, or have we jumped to the solution space? And then we define what's needed at each one of those stages. So basically, exploratory research is market focused, and strategic research is problem focused. And then the tactical research is solution focused, and operations is just optimization and polishing around the edges. And that's why A/B testing, being an optimization focused activity, it doesn't tell us any of those other three levels that lies ahead of it. The bigger picture is, as you know, macro customer experience or macro user experience, which is more strategic, and the other two layers are more micro and more tactical. And in the most common user research activities, some of them are obviously very tactical, like Google Analytics, like heat maps, A/B testing. Some of them can be strategic, like surveys, or if you use the surveys to ask about a specific thing or specific solution, it can be considered tactical. Information architecture, like card sorting and retesting, can be considered tactical. The same goes for usability testing. With user interviews and contextual inquiry, that's more strategic or more macro in its sense. Obviously, those are the most common research activities during discovery phases, because we still don't have enough solutions. We haven't defined any solutions yet. So we use those three activities, those strategic activities, before product inception. And also, obviously, we can only have those research activities when we have a live product that's producing user data and user insights in its quantitative terms. And if we have a critical to validate feature, usually those are some of the best user research activities that we can use for design concepts in whichever fidelity it is. So in other words, we are in a constant motion of constant discovery and constant delivery. Some activities happen during discovery part of it, some happen during the delivery part of it, but we are constantly, with every sprint, we are discovering and delivering at the same time. Sometimes we will have a couple of sprints considered spikes, and we are only considering it as a discovery phase, or with new engagements with new clients, we can put together 4 or 5 weeks of discovery and strategy work, and only then we deliver. But in reality, it's a dual track agile. It's 2 tracks rather than 2 teams, because some teams might do it differently. I've been involved in few products life cycle where it was a team doing discovery and another team doing delivery, and there is a lot of friction would be happening. The reason is the discovery team would be looked at as being more strategic or more defining the direction, while the delivery team sometimes would be looking across the organization as an execution, which is not really true, because both of them are doing things differently, and they are complementing each other. Also, one of the mishaps or the disadvantages of having 2 teams is you will have a lot of handovers and a lot of meetings that's happening between those 2 teams. the best thing is to have the same core team designing and delivering, and seeing things happening in real life, and being in touch with the users, being in touch with the data, and doing things as they go, every sprint at a time. And then they release when the time is right. They have that autonomy, and they are the captains of that ship. So in summary, research happens throughout the product lifecycle, from discovery to launch and beyond. It's not a specific phase. Research is never a phase. Research is an ongoing activity that people should have it as part of their daily work. Before going in summary, we have covered the 10 myths. I would just summarize the 10 myths, and I will open for any further questions. So as we have seen, research is not optional. It's very important for survival, especially when people's needs are constantly changing. Data is not always enough. It's more of data-informed decision-making rather than data-driven decision-making. Unhappy users sometimes trump happy users. Sometimes they tell us more than the happy users that keep coming to the product or the service. Launched designs are definitely much better than concepts. If you do concepts, that's great, but we should always aim at producing those concepts, especially that the devil lies in details. When the delivery time or the execution time comes, most of those concepts will change as time goes by, until it gets released and measured. User research is definitely much broader and than usability testing. Usability testing is just one of the activities that's very tactical as well. Usability testing is not that expensive in this day and age. It should be a second nature to every team to test their designs and their work. Focus groups are not very effective in the majority of the cases. They are effective in some cases, but maybe not in our day-to-day work. A/B testing is not enough to tell the full story, why things are working, why they are not working. We are definitely not the users, and neither are our clients or our stakeholders. And we should have the consultative approach of making them being more empathetic and being more in touch with the real users. And research happens across the life cycle. It's not only during discovery. Discovery is just the start of research and the definition of research goals and research plan. But research happens more on the tactical day-to-day work, or if we want the exploratory or the strategic research, we should do it every few sprints or every important point in the roadmap. That was the 10 user research myths. Thanks everyone for being kind and listening to me. And now I'm happy to answer any further questions.
Awesome. I just realized I totally forgot to take photos. So maybe I'll take photos of the recording later and pretend like I took it live. We have a few more questions just for the socials.
Sure.
People are asking if they can get, and I don't want to put you under the spot, like there's a lot of great content in here, and feel free to, I mean, they're going to get the video anyway, so, but
Sure.
they're asking if they can get access to the presentation. And also there was a question around, can they get a consolidated list of the myths on one sheet?
Oh, okay. That's actually a good thing. I haven't thought about producing this slide to be widely used. I will look into making a minified version of it that maybe summarizes the 10 myths. I'm happy to do that. I will share it on the Meetup page. Maybe later. Yeah.
No rush. Okay, awesome. Another question, what do you think about the UX level of companies here in the UAE? I've been looking at the market before the virus, and there are no openings, and if there are, the level of the company is quite disappointing or underpaid. Great question.
It's a very good question, Jonathan. Well, the thing is, I cannot speak on behalf of every team or every company. It would be cruel and uninformed. Also, I've been around in Dubai for 9 years now, so I can only speak on those experiences. I feel like we are still slightly behind from, in terms of UX maturity, from many other markets. But the thing that gets me excited and optimist is that a lot of people are hungry to do things right. A lot of people want to put the UX design community in Dubai on the map in the world. It's just phenomenal, the energy and the level of competence that people have here. The only thing is we are only as mature in our process as our businesses and our employers allow it. So there is 5 levels of maturity in the maturity model for businesses. Some businesses don't even allow or are in touch with the UX at all. And some businesses only define their strategy, and that's the top levels, define the strategy after they do the right thing for the user. They are customer focused. And there is everything else in between. It depends on every team. And like I mentioned in the beginning, our job as UX specialists or as designers or product managers is to evangelize what's right for the user, because usually what's right for the user is almost always is what's right for the business. It's the way we frame it and the way we speak the business lingo and the way we choose the right opportunity to promote those UX practices is what counts. Being consultative and being business oriented also helps. The whole industry globally, we were talking like 5 or 7 years ago about having a seat on the table. Right now, we do have that seat on the table. There is in many clients that I work with, they have a VP of CX or design director, and they want to do things right. They have that seat on the table. It comes down to us to evangelize UX practices to developers and testers and product managers and everybody else in the organization. There is hope, and there is a long way for us to do it, but I see a lot of great minds here in Dubai that will change and rock things hopefully soon.
Awesome. We got a lot of questions, so maybe just kind of give people like a teaser or something, and they can take it offline. So the question is starting to pile up. Just adding to that question, are there any internships or entry-level jobs in the field of UI, UX, or design available in the UAE?
Well, I will,
as far as you're aware.
Good, Jonathan.
What about ask me? I think.
Yeah.
So I think, just to answer it, like Robert, I probably have less visibility because I'm client side. I do have a lot of friends and contacts in Dubai. I think it was challenging before COVID in terms of internships. You don't tend to see a huge number of them, unfortunately. Potentially because of the maturity of design in the UAE. But I think in terms of entry-level jobs, my view from where I'm sitting, which is maybe not holistic, is it's going to be even more challenging than before. So if organizations have to be selective and a lot more stringent over who they do hire, unfortunately, that means that those entry-level jobs are probably going to be harder to find, and it'll take some time before things stabilize. I don't feel we've seen the full effect of the virus. I know many jobs have been lost, many design teams, like you've seen. I'm sure people have seen, some of the largest and best design teams on the planet. What did you see? What was it? Airbnb and Uber, I think, as well. Like they're all creating these lists. You see, tens, if not hundreds, of designers, like great designers who are have lost their jobs. So, if anything, that the market's going to be, I think, it'll be an employer's market where there's more people looking for work than actual work, and they'll be selective, which means that those entry-level positions will probably be more challenging. I don't know. Anything you wanted to add, Robert?
For example, in Tiger Spike, we used to have internships in Dubai. I'm talking only about our team in Dubai. at the moment, we don't have availability for internships, not only because of the situation, but because of right now there is more supply than demand. And in terms of the clients that we work with, I haven't come across any of the large organizations where they have a methodical way of doing internships. The only example that comes to mind is what Google is doing and currently is doing. They never stop their internship program, but there is nowhere to be found in the MENA region, so it's unfair to the region here. What I would always say is, if you are looking at transitioning into UX, start by doing some freelance work. Even on the early scale, there is always something to be done. Invest in your own skills, invest in your own knowledge, read a lot of books, attend a lot of conferences online or offline, and start doing freelance work so that you are positioned as a working professional. That will get you a foot in the door much easier. I will speak about my own experience. I was a developer until 2010, 2011, and I was so passionate back then, a decade ago, about UX as I am now. But I decided to take that route of investing in myself and investing in my knowledge, and started doing freelance work until the time came to be a full-time working professional in terms of UX career. I don't think we will see a methodical or mature market for internships anytime soon. It's a shame. I would love to tap into the huge potential of universities, but unfortunately, there isn't even a good design curriculum in universities at the moment. The whole design industry now is moving into design education, which is a great thing to be done. We are a few years, if not decades, behind the other disciplines like engineering or medicine. But it's good that this discussion or this buzz is happening now. We are still like at least 4 or 5 years behind until we see a good design curriculum out there.
Cool. Just on the same area, I'm trying to kind of virtually theme the questions without post-it notes, which is tricky. Just regarding global companies like Airbnb, Uber, Google, Apple, etc., how can we judge what's important for a specific region, and how much importance should be focused on cultural ethics and behavior models for any global company?
Are you talking about culture inclusion in design?
I'm not quite sure. I'm now rereading the questions. I'm not sure. But the other one, which is also in that area, was what countries do you think are ahead in design? One thing I just wanted to add, it's something that, so in 2014, went to the best design conference I've been to, where Erica Hall, who you mentioned, and Mike Montero, I don't know if you were aware they're married to each other.
They are married, yeah. They are the founders.
Yeah, that's right. So one of the things Erica said was, if anyone has on their title, this is 2014, right? So 6 years ago. If anyone has on their title UX/UI, then get rid of it like as soon as you can right now, because there's no such thing, right? Either you are a, you could be, if you're very, very laser sharp focused, you could be an interaction designer or visual designer, or you're just a product designer or a experience designer. But to try to label yourself, and I'm just seeing a lot of that, so it's just it's one of my pet peeves. But anyway, where do you think design, I'm going to change the question a bit, is ahead in terms of regions, and any other to look for good opportunities? So your thoughts on countries ahead. That was one of the questions.
Well, we will always have to look with some sort of respect and awe to Silicon Valley and the United States. They are in the forefront of the design, whether from design literature. The majority of the books that we read are from the Americas. The majority of the successful products that we use are based in the United States. However, in the last few years, we can see the Scandinavian design language appearing. Japan is also on the rise, and well, China has always had their own thing. So every region has their own bits of design significance and design languages as well. In the Arab region, it's something that I've been passionate about over the past few months. We have huge potential because it's a different language from the rest of the world, and designers, Western designers, can design for Western languages. But when it comes for really cultural relevance, only the homegrown designers can design for that culture in that specific language, which is the Arab language. Significantly, it's the fourth used language on the internet with over 400 million users. So I would always say that in the top bit of design maturity, it's the States, but comes close second, the Scandinavian and the European design community. I think we have a huge potential here in the region, in the Arab region, to make a significant dent in the design community globally. It's a call to action to everyone hearing us or reaching here is we should look at the region and look at more inclusivity in how we design for that region, especially when we keep hearing a lot of CEOs and a lot of users on the app store saying, where is the Arabic variation of that app, or where is the Arabic design for that website? We want to use it in Arabic. It's our language. We want it. There is a huge opportunity there, and I think it should occur anytime soon.
Great. Definitely agree with you. You forgot Australia and New Zealand, of course, but that's okay. You're probably
well,
not
you know what?
that neck of the woods.
No, I completely thought about it, but I always consider Australia as part of the Western culture of design. You guys are doing a lot of great things down under, but yeah, it's not yet its own design language. It's more of an adaptation from what's happening in Europe and America, or at least from what I've seen. Of course, you would speak better about Australia and New Zealand.
It's okay. We don't need to get into that debate. I think one point, though, I would add, though, that's interesting. I know Tanya's on the call, but I've spoken to many Americans. One interesting area, though, that I would disagree with you is service design. So service design, Scandinavia definitely, and the UK, for example, as well as Australia, are leading the way. It's not as big in the US. You don't have as many jobs. You don't have as much as a focus, especially in places like Silicon Valley. That's all about product and product release. It is less about service design, which, it's been a while since we've had a topic on. But we've got probably too many questions to cover, but let's do a few more if you don't mind.
I agree with you, by the way, about service design. I was talking more of product design and tactical design sphere, but definitely service design and business design, the bigger picture. Yeah, of course.
So he came late to the meeting, and you're very lucky he came late, because I was bombarded with questions. But one of your fellow Tiger Spike comrades there, I think you probably know who I'm talking about. Yeah, you guessed it. See, Axel, if only during my talk I had the ability to just, do a mute all and have a moderator, I'd be home free, like, Robert's lucky. This is great. So anyway, sorry, Axel. He's asking, how do you sell UX research to companies, stakeholders with low design maturity?
Yeah, great question. Very good one. Axel is one of the key and star researchers and designers in our team at Tiger Spike Dubai, and we usually find it difficult to sell UX research to low maturity stakeholders or companies. The reason is they might not care about what users think. They might only care about releasing in the market and saying, well, we have released this feature on that quarter and we are happy, our stakeholders are happy, but maybe not our users are happy. The fastest way of doing research is by doing research without asking permission. So you can just time box a day or a couple of days and do something that would significantly make people more empathetic about your users. You can look at what people are saying online, on Twitter and on LinkedIn about your product. You can quickly look at the App Store, get some qualitative insights. It's almost like a survey if you look at it. Every app review is a survey, how much you like our product or what's not working well in our product. You have your answers there. Just time box a day or two and give that feedback to your business, telling them, you know what, this feature that we just released is not actually doing anything. Your problem is in operations, or your problem is in the contact center that might take 15 minutes to answer. And that's the evidence that we have done in a day. Imagine if you give us 15 days or 20 days, what outputs we will be able to do. And just doing it every now and again will start training people that, well, there is more to this, or there is value of what those guys are doing. It's not only designing beautiful screens or doing user journeys and flows. Those guys will get me more in touch, or will get me on the pulse of what users think about my product. And this is when you start evangelizing UX in those companies.
Great. We've got a couple of questions. I might take the first one if you don't mind, just to.
Please go.
I think you've covered it, so I'm not sure when he joined, but Wayne's asking, what are the best ways to test utility, value, usefulness? I mean, value is something we've recently, a few of the teams at Property Finder that I work with have been testing, and it's something we typically test when we're looking at something new that may not exist in the wild. And I think, so one common practice we've done is a hybrid of some of what Robert's been talking about. So you do maybe in an hour session, half an interview, and then the other half is a usability test. And that could be of, say, a mock-up if it hasn't been designed yet. And the core thing you're trying to understand in this case is value, usefulness, you know? So, and a great question is the CSAT question, like customer satisfaction. So it's something you're gonna ask throughout, but once they kind of see the thing at the end, you could say, thinking about your needs to do this job, whatever that job to be done is, how would you rate this experience? And then why did you give that rating? What can we do to improve it? What's missing? I mean, you'll get a pretty good idea throughout, but that's hopefully that's answered that one. But a great follow-up question Wayne had, and I'd like you to answer that, Robert, is the future. Like, where do you think, I'm trying to find it now. Here we go. Do you think certain types of research will be done more by AI and ML in the future?
Ooh, it's a very leading question, that's for sure. And I think it holds true to it. Rather than going and diving deep into the analytics and the boring data and charts and trying to come up with a pattern recognition is a well-established use case for AI, and I believe this is going to be the case for specific things, though, because sometimes patterns would only emerge when you connect the dots of something you've seen in a product or something working in your product, but in a different feature on a different module or section. So it's not all or none; it's case by case basis. I think the whole industry is moving towards doing research more prominently than just beautiful designs. This design used to be skin deep. That was a decade ago. Right now, it's way beyond that. And you touched upon service design and business design. To do that, you cannot automate it. It has so much layers to it, and sometimes the actual solution is not even a product. Sometimes it's a change in a process or operations, or even change in the person the concierge, for example, who greets people, maybe in a hotel or in a mall, changing the position from being in the entrance to being probably in the car park or in the drop area. That would solve a lot of problems, for example. So there is huge opportunity for AI and ML, but it's not going to replace what humans add to the process.
You're breaking up a little bit, so maybe turn off the video if you don't mind. So we had some similar questions, and I think you've covered it throughout the talk. just around, how to convince leadership to do research, which I do believe you've covered. And yeah, when you're, any UX frameworks you recommend, you did cover that in your talk, bureaucracy. But there's one question here I wanted to touch on, and I apologize if you feel Robert hasn't covered your question. Please, again, reach out to himself or myself or Nada, or I'm sure Greta or Abdul Rahman, anyone on the call would be happy to answer after. So a question from Honey James: while we are on the development of a product, as you explained, research is an ongoing process. Till what stage can we change our ideations and concepts according to the newly found out information?
It depends on how this newly found information will be detrimental to your idea. So if you found out, for example, I will say a stupid example. If you are designing on the assumption that everyone likes the color blue, and you suddenly found an insight that a lot of your customer base that you are targeting with your product likes the color green, then you absolutely have to change course. However, if it's something that, well, people love blue, but they might be susceptible to liking green as well. Okay, maybe that's a weaker hypothesis. Maybe we need to do some testing or release and see what people are perceiving the blue to be performing. And if it's working well, if it's beyond a certain threshold that we all agree on, then let's continue on the course, even before launching things. So it all depends. I'm afraid it's case by case basis.
No, that's a good one. Another one from Dan, our calling from the US. As someone transitioning, I'm considering some form of education to help with background knowledge and associated clout. Any thoughts on boot camps, Coursera courses? I'll let you take it, and I'm happy to also add to that as well. Like, what has clout in the design space? Do you want me to go first, or do you want to?
I would love for you to go first. I want to take my time.
I think, yeah. Maybe I'll give you I'll buy you a bit of time. Like, this is a great question. I think especially for people new or people transitioning into design. In other industries, you do have, like if you want to be a project manager, you do, I don't know, Prince 2 or PMBOK or whatever. If you be an executive, you do an MBA, and some of these things, they have clout in those industries. Design doesn't really have, like, you've got, and please, this is my opinion, right? Like, I'm sure there are others, and some even potentially on the call, who have a degree from some of these places who will disagree. But in my opinion, as a hiring manager, none of these things really impress me. So if you've sat some exam somewhere and you have a Nielsen Norman degree or a UX Professionals or anything like that, design is just quite immature and hasn't established itself, or has, and it's so quickly evolving and changing as we speak that any piece of paper or degree, even from some universities, doesn't have as much clout as an actual your actual experience. So I would just echo what Robert said earlier around, if you don't have experience and you don't have and you're looking for work, then just work on a startup. It doesn't have to be successful as a startup, but just your own pet project, so you can show in a portfolio. We had a question earlier, Robert, around portfolios. Portfolio is hugely important. So you can then show in a portfolio, this is how I went about doing this. This thing may not be successful, but I really want to try it in the wild. Like, theory is one thing. I mean, I would say the only caveat to that, I would say in Australia, for example, General Assembly, who's a US based like design and product and a whole bunch of other innovative things. I don't know if people have heard of General Assembly. You can Google that, or we can add it to the chat. They do have a fair bit of clout. So because there's such demand and such shortage of jobs in Australia, if you have a 10-week course from someone like General Assembly, you can change from being a lawyer to being a designer. there's just not enough designers coming out, and not enough university degrees or whatever, people with holistic experience out there. And there are universities that are starting to have, you know, more clout, but I think the value of you doing something at a university for those X number of years, as a hiring manager, I'd be more impressed with experience. You know, but for sure, all of these courses are great. It's just, I think, just don't put so much value on that piece of paper at the end. You know, it's more, you know, like your Coursea's, General Assemblies, or whatever, Nielsen Norman, like they all have great value, conferences, etc. It's just more about your experience, as opposed to you thinking that that piece of paper will mean people, you know, give you that respect. Anyway, my 2 cents. I know that was a long one. Robert, what do you think?
I share the same sentiment, John. The thing is, what I see is experience is usually everything in terms of part of our job. The majority of our job as UX specialists or designers is convincing skills, persuasion skills, presentation skills, of course, design skills. But the design part of the work is sometimes taking the backseat. I've seen brilliant designs and brilliant designers got burned when they present the work or present the research findings, because it doesn't show a story, or it doesn't doesn't answer the actual right questions to it. But that's unfair to people entering the field. So every piece of education that you can get is definitely valuable. I personally am an avid follower for Nielsen Norman Group. They are my go-to place for any UX literature. Of course, the General Assembly, Coursera's, every course and every book that you can get your hand on is definitely going to add to you. But the more you put yourself in a tricky situation, the more experienced and well-rounded designer you will be. Because at the end of the day, you will have to work with developers. You have to tell them why you're placing this button here. You will have to work with stakeholders and persuade them to invest into putting Hotjar into your product. You will have to work with UI designers if you're a UX researcher, and tell them why you should change this color or change this design from being light to dark theme. You should produce evidence to it. And those skills are not usually not in books. Those skills will only come with practice. So whatever practical situation you can put yourself in, sometimes it's much better and faster to progress in your career rather than attending courses. However, that shouldn't stop you from attending those courses.
Yeah, great. I'm gonna just take it over to Assad, who was being very patient. He asked a couple of questions earlier on, and they were, can you share any metrics of success for usability testing? And the other one is, any best practice to document feedback, validating hypothesis feedback grid?
Okay, I will take the first one. In terms of success metrics for usability studies, you have task completion metrics. So how many people were able to complete that specific task that you're giving them. And you can go slightly deeper into the scale by saying they have successfully completed the task with ease, if you have seen them flying through the flow or flying through the specific task, or they might have succeeded but with a little bit of friction, so that can be another metric, or if they have completely failed and you had to step in to help them. That's usually a metric. If you are looking at other usability metrics, when you release that feature, you can always look at the speed of finishing a specific flow. So for example, in the check-in flow in the mobile app for Emirates Airlines, the previous flow was 40% slower than the new one that we designed. And it was mostly a success because we have seen that task completion is faster. Hence, it's much easier for people to check in their flights and then go and finish whatever they are about to do on the pre-departure flight. So those are on top of my head kind of answers for you.
Right. The other one is the one I mentioned earlier, Assad, which is CSAT. So, you could call it, customer satisfaction or experience. Like, how would you rate this experience? How easy was this from 0 to 10 or from 0 to 7 or whatever metric you're using? And then you have an average. So, you spoke to 12 people of X number of persona groups. What was the average for every single question? And that gives you, while it's not statistically significant, it gives you an indication of, maybe where's the biggest pain, for example. That would also be covered by, like, as Robert was saying, like the usability, right? If it's a yes or a no, like pass or failure rates. And the second one, Robert, was any best practices to document feedback, validating hypothesis, feedback grid. I guess, are you asking, Assad, how do you analyze usability tests or
document the insights? Well, in terms of analysis, when you see enough patterns emerging, if people are failing in that specific field or that specific button or the clarity of that specific form, then you have that insight in place, and the only way forward is to fix it and retest it. If you're talking about validating assumptions and documenting those validations in terms of actionable insights, there is always the tools like Dovetail or Airtable or good old Trello or Google Sheet to document those insights. If you found out a factual thing, like people want to have this specific category in the initial screen of the app because this is a shortcut for them that they use every day. For example, like Uber or Careem, the first thing that you see is the map and you just start ordering from there. Yes, of course, if that's an actionable insight or just a general insights that will not change over time, you can put it over there so that it's trackable and you don't really need to keep validating it over and over if teams changed or if management changed. But on the ongoing work, you can always look at documenting things, but the best way is to fix things as they go if you're doing those studies on frequently basis. And documenting it as learnings. Like when we've done this so and so in this way, it didn't work well. However, when we did it this way on so and so, it worked 50% better, or the usability was 5 seconds faster. And that format applies when you're doing A/B testing or usability testing. Usually it's a very generic format for learnings. And if you frame it as learnings, it will make people more curious to read those learnings rather than being shelved somewhere.
Awesome. I've just asked Nada to unmute if you want to answer. There have been a lot of questions around UX, UI, and product designer. I think one thing I just wanted to say, Nada, before I hand over to you to kind of answer anything you like, is that if you look at, again, I mean, I would agree with Robert, in terms of industry maturity, people constantly look at your Facebook, Google, Amazon, Apple as being the leaders of, tech and design industry. And one thing, so when I was in Australia, one thing as a design team, I worked in a company that went from 9 to 40 designers. Sorry, Nat, I'll just mute you. There's a little bit of background noise. Went from 9 to 40 designers in 3 years, and today they have something like 80 because they include UX writers. Greta's no longer on the call, but and we looked at best practice, like how do we create job descriptions, and we changed the word UX designer because people were very much focused on your job is to just design the the pixels, to product designer, based on that leadership from Facebook, Google, etc. And product designer, and something that's what we use at Property Finder as well, encompasses all areas of design, from research to interaction design, as well as visual design. So, and again, like somebody I think answered, I think it was Nada who said that that shows the maturity of the organization. If they're just looking for a UX/UI, then they're probably just looking for a visual designer who may not even do a lot of interaction or testing, never mind research, like some of what Robert's been sharing. But ideally, more mature organizations who are looking for a product designer or a UX designer or experience designer are looking for someone that's got you know, those three disciplines. Not to say you have to be an expert in all three, but at least to have dabbled in some of them. And the even more mature would have specialists. So you could just be a design researcher who just does research and bleeds into a little bit of that interaction working with, or you could just be a pure visual designer. But if you're a product visual designer or a visual designer, you should be wary of calling yourself a product designer, because you may be asked in a more mature organization to conduct research, which you may not want or have the, you know, the skill set to do. Anything you wanted to add to that, Robert, or Nada? Maybe I'll hand over to Nada. Sorry.
Hi guys. No, I think Jonathan, I think what you just said right now basically really sums it up. And it was just, there was a few questions coming through. Should they call themselves UX/UI designers or product designers? What's the difference? I mean, we've had a talk in the past, the difference between UX and UI a few years ago, actually. Maybe it's time that we do another one and have a more, you know, in-depth conversation about this, as everyone always likes to discuss it. I've just noticed that from my experience, you could, I mean, a lot of people these days are saying they do UX, right? So a lot of people these days would put UX on their resumes, they put them in their portfolios. But what does it mean to be a UX designer? What are your UX skills exactly? Do you do research? Do you, you know, is it just the fact that you can push out some wireframes and all of a sudden you become a UX designer? That is not UX. And vice versa, you know, are you someone who's focused on UX and is able to put up a couple of colors and designs into their wireframes? That is not UI. And there are specific skill sets that go into each of these areas of work that would allow us to come up with these amazing products at the end of the day. So we need to be able to, as professionals in the field, we need to be the advocates about that, because companies these days are coming out with these job descriptions that you see on LinkedIn and asking for all of it. And I think that it's up to us as people in the industry and people who are practicing to go back to companies and even in interviews and really make the case for why you would be a great UX designer or a great UI designer or a great product designer, but not try to be everything. Because if you are, you're probably going to end up in a job where you're not happy, where all the work is going to be on you, the maturity of that organization is low, and then you start hearing about, you know, the complaints that maybe in this region it's not as advanced as other regions. But we need to be that change. So we need to go into that industry and we need to start making that change, rather than allowing these organizations dictate what these roles should be when they probably have no idea what exactly in that job entails themselves.
Yeah, and I would like to add to this, Nada, a couple of other points. It's very important in terms of those job descriptions to see who's posting it and who the recruiting team would be, or how the org chart is going to work for you as a UX or UI designer or product designer. So who do design team report to? Is it for the product team? Is it for the IT team, which is something that we have seen happening? Because that will also indicate the maturity of that company. Or is it a VP of design or VP of experience design? That will tell you how successful this company is at embodying human-centered design practices. Also, the second thing is product design as a title was not there a few years ago. And the same happens around UX/UI designers. In reality, it wasn't there 10 or 12 years ago. And I'm sure that the term or the title, product designer, might not last for the next 10 years. It might change. Things will change. So if you are a product designer for an AI solution, what would be your title? Or a designer for a no UI product like Alexa or Siri, it has zero UI to it. So that's also an indication. So the job description itself is very important. What are you going to work on? And like Nada, I absolutely agree with you. You should not, and you cannot be everything for everyone, because once you are a generalist, you're going to be a design team of one, which is actually not good for the bigger process. It's a single point of failure, and that shouldn't be the case in any company.
Yeah. Great points. Nada, did you have any other, before we kind of wrap up and talk about next month meetup, any other questions that you wanted to answer? I think there were a lot of in the same space, or
Yeah,
any
there
final
seems to be a
ones?
lot in the same space. I guess it would be interesting if people are interested in having this maybe discussion. Maybe it would be, this would probably be a good one as a panel discussion to potentially have, where we can invite people from maybe agency, from, you know, companies, hiring managers, to have a
Yeah,
discussion around this, and just
good
maybe
point.
even bring a specialist in UX, a specialist in UI, and then be able to discuss what does it mean to actually be in this role, and what should my job look like. So for those people who are trying to get into that kind of work, I think one of the things that, you know, it would be really good to try to do is try to influence industry here in this region to, you know, try to get a little bit more advanced as well, because we do have a lot of work to get there. There is a lot of UX and UI jobs being advertised in this region, but I think the businesses or the companies who are looking for those skills, or, you know, those type of roles, they need to be educated on what those roles should be, to help us bring up the maturity in this region. So maybe, yeah, maybe this is a point of discussion that we can work on.
Yeah, it's a great idea. We haven't done a panel for a while, and we haven't done a virtual panel. It's a good point. I think, yeah, the only thing, I guess, like my former job was in a consultancy. I think like both of you, I mean, I know you've kind of been both sides now, Nada. The challenge thing in with small teams is that, yes, you don't want necessarily a unicorn, but you do want people to be able to dabble in all three, and to take a project from a research phase to an interaction, exploration, and a design, and working with developers to
Of
a
course, yeah.
final fidelity stage, which it is hard to have someone with all skill sets. And I think there's a lot of places in Dubai that tend to say remove research and say design, that's not part of your job. And you'd have someone like Tanya, who respect Tanya, still on the call, who is a research specialist. Yeah. But I guess from a if you're in a product company, that becomes challenging because you've got very limited resources, limited number of people in your design team. But I think, yeah, I agree with you. It'd be a great it'd be a great topic for a debate. So thank you so much, Robert. Appreciate it. I know we've kind of gone way over time. I just wanted to share really quickly. I just posted it today. We're going to be, where is it? Oh, let me just get to the right. Here we go. So next month, I'm going to be sharing. Nada is going to be playing host. Thank you, Nada. It's on June, what's the date? June 23rd. And I'll be talking about a design sprint. So like very, very kind of not your textbook stuff, but through case studies, two very different case studies. One working at a consultancy with a startup. So an in-person, in the room design sprint. And the other, oh great, we already got 20, that's awesome. And the other example will be remote, so using Miro and Zoom to conduct global design sprints with a startup. So hope everyone can make it. If you do have any suggestions, if you want to be a speaker, then please reach out to myself or Nada. And if you have any further questions, again, apologies if we didn't cover them. You can reach out to Robert, myself, or Nada direct on LinkedIn. And thanks everyone for coming. Thank you again, Robert. That was really awesome.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thanks, Nada, for giving me the opportunity, and thanks, everyone. Looking forward to meeting you all in person, hopefully soon.
Awesome. I'm just going to unmute all. Okay, anyway.
Okay.
Jonathan, there was a request to save the chat.
Yes.
I don't know if you're able to do that, but maybe post it along with the YouTube video.
I saw that. Yeah, I'll try to post it now with the, I don't know if YouTube allows. Otherwise, I'll put it on a Google Doc or something and provide a link. I'll do that.
Great. Okay, thanks
Thanks,
guys.
everyone.
Thanks
We did.
everyone.
I'll send you the chat as well, Robert. We had a lot of really great feedback in the chat. I don't know if you managed to see, but people really enjoyed it, and yeah, it was really awesome. The 3 dot buttons to save chat. Yeah. I'm not talking about saving chat. I wanted to unmute everyone. Anyway.
Okay. Have a great evening, everyone. Until next
Thanks,
time.
everyone. Bye.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.